Among the Everglades swamps, where swamp sawgrass tangles with cypress roots, a 16-foot Burmese python crawls in search of prey. Soon it will find it, strike, and have its meal. But meanwhile, inside the python itself, another hunt is happening. Another predator is moving with it through the thickets. And no matter what the python does, that predator will prevail and, once victorious, emerge from its body. Rich Inner World. An unobtrusive reminder to do that thing under the video, in case you forget. So, while the python is slithering through the Everglades, it's time to take a look inside to see another hunter. A worm-like creature has settled in the snake's lungs and is slowly draining its life, feeding on blood just to stay alive. This is a parasitic crustacean known as the tongue worm. It lays its eggs right inside the python's body, then grows, wreaking massive damage on its host. To keep it more interesting, let's view this stage as if it were a game. Picture a strange mob, a pale parasite, bean sprout shaped, up to 3 inches long. At times, it moves on its own. In rare events, this parasite bursts out through the snake's mouth, pushing from its lungs even after the host has died. Now let's look at the mechanics. Its life cycle is basically a whole chain of quests. The starting stage, the eggs get tossed out of the infected snake's gastrointestinal tract. The next player in this chain is an insect, which picks up this drop and becomes a temporary carrier. Next comes the upgrade. An infected insect gets eaten by an amphibian or a reptile, and now it's nothing more than a temporary resource. The final boss is a new snake that swallows the infected prey. At that point, the tongue worm jumps back into the game, but now on a new field, inside a fresh host, where it calmly grows and develops. Scientists say that a snake's lungs can be home to dozens, even hundreds of these parasites. There's a documented case where, during an autopsy, 107 adult tongue worms were found in the respiratory system of an eastern racer. The consequences of such neighbors are obvious. If a giant worm is settled in the lungs, breathing gets harder, energy runs low, and the snake is doomed in the end. But the problem isn't the parasite itself. It's the fact that it's invasive, just like its original hosts. Invasive Burmese pythons, quickly spreading through Florida's ecosystems, carry with them a tongue worm that's also moving into new areas and onto new hosts. Scientists first found a local snake infected with this creature back in 2012. Tracing the source, they concluded that the disease came from Asia along with Burmese pythons, which were brought to Florida in the mid-1990s. Since then, Rayleigh orientalis has invaded the respiratory system of at least 19 out of 46 local snake species, from banded water snakes to eastern racers. Researchers also note that the population of pygmy rattlesnakes in the Everglades has dropped noticeably. The spread of the parasite might be the reason. By the way, all the infection cases were recorded in the south of the state, right where the pythons have already settled in. Outside their range, no infections were found. Coincidence? Of course not. And it's important to point out one more thing. Burmese pythons, naturally large, can carry a lung parasite for a long time and stay alive. Plus, they evolved alongside tongue worms, so they're more resilient to the infection. But local, smaller snakes are way more vulnerable. They have no defense mechanisms perfected over thousands of years. Their respiratory system is smaller, so a tongue worm can easily disrupt it. Inflammation, infections, loss of normal breathing, none of this ever ends well. In some snakes, adult parasites grow up to almost 4 inches, feeding on the host's blood and leaving pneumonia or even sepsis behind. Weakened reptiles stop hunting and often die of starvation. The threat's only growing. Parasite is shielded from the cold by its host's body so it can survive frost. And Florida's green, swampy areas give it plenty of intermediate hosts. That means it can spread further and further, finding more victims. It's possible that the problem with parasites and snakes is way more serious than it seems at first glance. Scientists admit only half of the known snake species in the US and Canada have ever been checked for parasites. What's happening with the rest? Nobody really knows. The key challenge is that snakes are masters of disguise. Finding them in the wild, tracking their lives, and especially figuring out how parasites affect their behavior or health is almost impossible. There are ways to follow individual snakes with implanted transmitters, but it's exhausting and expensive work. And while snakes hide from sight, we tend to underestimate the importance of what's happening, which means the scale of the threat could be much bigger than we think right now. But do we actually need to do anything about it? In theory, you could save some of the infected snakes if you caught them and gave them treatment. In reality, though, that's impossible. You'd have to treat not only the snakes, but also every intermediate host. Frogs, lizards, various cockroaches. Still, scientists are seeing reasons for cautious optimism. Research shows while numbers of some species are dropping, the Florida cottonmouth, even with severe infection, continues to hold its ground. Its immune system seems better at dealing with the parasite. This suggests that some local snakes could still mitigate the effects of the infection and figure out a way to live alongside the new parasite. Perhaps the snakes will even evolve to fight it off. Actually, tongueworms are really impressive. They don't just live in a snake, they can survive even after their host dies, though not for very long. Most other parasites, like flukes, follow the animal when it dies. These worms, living in a snake's mouth, are easy to spot if you carefully make the snake open its mouth. The tiny parasites sit on the roof of the mouth and along the sides. You can even gently pull them out with tweezers, but once the snake dies, it's the end for the parasites too. Flukes can travel the world too. The American snail, Ficella acuta, probably brought the fluke Ochetosoma elongatum to Japan, where it started infecting local snakes. Usually, these parasites go through a complex life cycle involving snails and maybe frogs before reaching snakes, but even so, their fate is tightly tied to their host. A snake's death is almost always fatal for them. Tongueworms are the exception to this rule. They can easily crawl out of the lungs, even after the snake is already dead, and make their way to the mouth. In the world of parasites, that makes them really cool and unusual. Survival after the host dies is extremely rare. Well, in fact, such cases do exist. As an example, scientists point to the Russell's viper, one of the most dangerous snakes in Asia. It's feared for its irritability, lightning-fast strikes, and hematotoxic venom that destroys tissue and blood. But inside this fearsome predator, a completely different enemy can hide: nematodes of the genus Calicicephalus. These thin worms settle in the stomach and intestines of snakes and lizards. Usually their presence only causes enteritis and related infections, but sometimes the consequences can be deadly. The most curious things happen after a snake dies. One day, researchers dissected a viper that had been killed with Aqueous chloratone and found a live tangle of parasites inside. The nematodes didn't care at all that their host was dead. The scientists preserved them for further study. Sometimes it feels like dead snakes can deliver downright impossible surprises. A Reddit user spotted a decaying snake body on a timber rack. When they picked it up and tried to move it, 24 wriggling creatures up to an inch long spilled out from inside. They looked like larvae, but way too big. Nobody in the comments could really explain what it was, but we have a guess. We're talking about the housefly, a synanthropic species that sticks close to humans. Normally, it's recognized as a carrier of diseases, but in some situations, it acts completely differently. Females may deposit eggs in moist, rotting tissue, including wounds on animals. That's how meiosis happens, an infestation by fly larvae that feed on dead or sometimes even living host tissue. In 2010, entomologists received a 27-inch Persian horned viper with an infected wound. When they checked it, the tissue was already infested with fly larvae. After all the larvae were taken out of the snake's body, they weren't destroyed right away. Some of the material was kept for observation. It was important for the scientists to track the life cycle. 10 larvae turned out to be quite lively and active, and nearby they found 4 pupae. They put them in separate containers, creating conditions close to natural. Just 3 days later, the process was complete. Adult flies emerged from the pupae, fully confirming that the scientists had correctly identified the species. The snake was extremely weak by this time. Even before the infection, it had shown signs of lethargy and loss of appetite, and that's what made it especially vulnerable. The damaged tissue gradually started to rot, moisture gathered around the wound, and that was enough to attract a female fly. It laid the eggs right in the soft, decaying spots. the larva that hatched in that environment quickly burrowed into the wound and began feeding on the tissue. And it's important to understand that adult flies aren't parasites in the usual sense, but under the right conditions, they can easily turn an animal into a living incubator for their larva. Actually, considering that in 3 days the larva would already turn into adult flies, it means that at the time they were found, they were almost at the final stage of development. For a snake of that size, a dozen hungry larvae is too much to handle. They were literally eating it from the inside. So you could say the snake got lucky. It was found and treated in time. Without human intervention, it probably would have died. Scientists note that such cases are recorded very rarely, even though they probably happen a lot. It's just that usually no one sees it or records it. If the snake had died at that moment, the process would have only sped up for the larva. The more dead and disgusting, the better for them. Then the larva would just complete the cycle and leave the snake's remains as flies. As for the Reddit case, it's not certain that it was just a regular housefly. Australia has plenty of species that behave in a similar way. By the way, some commenters suggested that the snake might have died by accident, getting stuck during molting. Only afterwards did a fly show up, lay eggs in the corpse, and soon larvae hatched from them. The rest is obvious. They feed on the tissues, pupae, and a few days later turn into adult flies. Only human interference stopped the process. Ants are the real cleaners in the world of decay. They can show up on a snake's body right after death and stick around through all stages of decomposition, even after the fly larvae leave. Their feeding leaves distinctive marks on the skin. Instead of the usual holes or punctures, there are uneven patches with wavy or jagged edges. Sometimes it looks like winding lines or small jagged cuts scattered across the skin. At first glance, these damages can easily be mistaken for scratches from life or chemical effects, but actually it's the work of ants after the snake has died. Invasive species like the red imported fire ant, Solenopsis invicta, are especially active. These insects show real aggression toward any other corpse invaders. They don't let flies lay eggs. They remove larvae, or they destroy them at every stage of development. Ants can feed on almost the entire body, speeding up decomposition while keeping other insects away. Basically, ants don't share their food. So if ants gather on a snake's corpse, it's a kind of living cleanup that can wipe out any parasites left inside and stop them from completing their life cycle. In this sense, ants are real post-mortem guardians, ready to fight anyone trying to make use of the snake's body. In one case, a wandering ant, Cheliomyrmex andicola, was feeding on a snake carcass. Although ants usually show up only after the animal's dead, in this case, it's quite likely that these ants actually killed the snake. What makes Cheliomyrmex andicola such a fearsome predator are the claw-like mandibles of the workers, armed with long, spike-like teeth. They probably help the ants hold on tight to the prey's skin during an attack. The bites of these ants are especially painful and itchy, comparable to fire ant stings in the US, and the venom, according to researchers, is toxic and possibly paralyzing. Based on observations, researchers believe that Cheliomyrmex andicola is the only known wandering ant species in the New World that eats the flesh of vertebrates. If these ants come across a snake carrying any of the parasites described above, the parasites will die along with their host. The ants will eat them too, as part of the general cleanup. Because, well, why let good stuff go to waste? This happened on the Greek island of Corfu, and it even surprised scientists, because one snake crawled out of another. And no, it wasn't live birth. According to published photos, a small wild reptile, Dahl's whip snake, survived after being swallowed by a four-lined snake. It all happened in 2011. The four-lined snake was killed by a domestic cat, and the cat's owner, a Dutchman, captured the event on camera. Not right away, of course. At first, his wife noticed that the dead snake seemed to be moving. The man was sure it was just his imagination until he realized the snake really wasn't dead. Well, at least not completely. When he came back with the camera, he saw the head of a little snake pushing its way out. In the end, the Dahl's whip snake got out and slid back into the wild, seemingly fine. All it suffered was its pride. In 2017, a man named Christopher Reynolds filmed a scary video where one snake throws up another. "That other snake's alive," you can hear Reynolds exclaiming in the video. "That's that other snake's super ultra lucky day. I can't believe this little dude's still alive. He couldn't breathe." This dude was just in stomach acid and all kinds of stuff. Wildlife biologist David Steen, who studies amphibians and reptiles at Auburn University, commented on this. He said that the larger snake in the video got scared, and it wasn't just because it broke its diet, but because it had eaten too much. You see, snakes find it hard to move fast after a heavy meal, and if they feel threatened, then they need to act. That's when the usual defense mechanism comes into play: regurgitation. And while there are species of snakes that specialize in eating other reptiles, this kind of behavior is still rare, yet the video shows even after ending up in another snake's stomach, the prey can survive and make it out, but only if luck is really on their side. Another interesting fact, you can actually extract eggs from a dead snake, which can later hatch into live young. Among snakes killed on the road or animals that died for other reasons, you'll often find pregnant ones with eggs. And taking them out requires a careful, methodical approach. Most of the time it doesn't work. The conditions have to be almost perfectly right. First, the snake needs to have died at the moment it was about to lay eggs, meaning they were already fully ready to survive on their own. Second, the eggs must fall within a very short window of external viability. Live eggs usually swell slightly, keeping their shape and firmness. If they shrink or get soft, that's a sure sign that something went wrong. Sometimes eggs look clean and intact at first, but over time they start showing signs of rot, most often because they weren't fully developed. They left the mother's body too early. By the way, eggs are usually pushed out by hand, slowly and gently with minimal effort, and they wait until they come out of the cloaca on its own. Cutting out the eggs exposes them to blood and intestinal contents, which greatly lowers their chances of hatching successfully. Washing the eggs, unless absolutely necessary, is also not recommended, as it can wash away natural protective substances that partly prevent bacteria and fungi from growing. Even if all conditions are met, hatching remains a rare and tricky process. It's a big stroke of luck if the eggs puff up after being removed rather than deflate. Experts say this gives hope for the survival of the offspring and its further development. On rare occasions, when everything falls into place, the eggs are mature. Extraction causes little damage, and their natural protective traits are preserved. Offspring really do come from dead snakes. It's extremely rare. Most of the time it fails, but sometimes little snakes still emerge, proving that even after the mother is gone, life can find a way. And since we're talking about interesting facts, here's another one. Snakes can also fall victim to ticks. In 2019, snake catchers in Australia rescued a carpet python that was literally covered in hundreds of ticks. The reptile, presumably sick and weakened by the parasites, was lying in a backyard pool on the Gold Coast in Queensland. A professional was called to pick up the snake, and he brought it to a wildlife clinic for treatment. Vets removed over 500 ticks, and according to an expert, the snake tried to drown the parasites in water. Apparently, it didn't work. Its whole face was swollen and blooming, and it was completely overwhelmed by the ticks breeding on it, the specialist noted. Removing the ticks felt like holding a bag of marbles that were moving under the hands. Sounds nasty. In the wild, snakes often pick up a few ticks and other parasites, but such a heavy infestation suggests that the animal probably had some underlying illness, maybe triggered by heat stress or drought. Clearly, it was a seriously unwell animal to have had its natural defenses so broken down. I doubt it would have survived if it hadn't been taken out and gotten treatment, said the vet. Later, it turned out that Nike, that's what they called the snake, suffered from an infection. But it's unclear whether it came before the ticks or because of them. I've never seen anything like this. I've done this for 26 years, and this is the worst I've ever seen, one of the vets admitted. Vets also noticed that not only female ticks had latched onto Nike, but males too. Most likely, the males had been on the snake for months, barely eating. They were just waiting for the females. In other words, for the males, the snake isn't a buffet, it's more like a nightclub where they can meet their queen. Once a female is fed, she releases a pheromone that signals she's ready to mate. After that, the males detach from the host and go on to reproduce. Then the females drop off to lay eggs, but the males stick around. They can hang on the snake their whole lives, as long as the snake's alive, and only let go when they die of old age. After all he'd been through, Nike, the python, was found to have anemia, a severe shortage of red blood cells caused by ticks sucking out too much blood. This case shows that parasites can literally weaken a python to death, And that's not the only case like this. In spring 2024, a python without eyes was found in the Everglades in Florida, and insects were parasitizing right in the eye sockets, which likely caused the vision loss. The conclusion is obvious. Ticks make life hard for snakes. They suck blood, draining energy, weaken immunity, make hunting and seeing harder. If there are too many, they can push a python to a point where it won't survive. Every individual, every tick is a potential threat, and together they can undermine a reptile's health from all sides. Now picture those ticks alongside other parasites, which, as you know, snakes already have plenty of, or maybe it's better not to picture it. In any case, don't forget about the like button. See you later.